gonna quickly walk through the implementation of Q1 episode 2, where we're looking at the start of implementing a clean architecture. So this is going to be a lot of new information, and if you feel a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of info, don't worry, because every episode after this we're going to focus in on every one of these aspects. I would just say, make sure that you work through it and understand the basics of this episode, and then we'll, in episode 3, start looking at layered architecture. So let's go through what's required to implement. Okay, so you can clone our code. I would suggest you do this. Git clone and go into Q1 and then change the branch to episode 2. So this will give you the code that I wrote for this episode, UV sync, and then you can run the FastAPI in dev. And this is what we'll look at. So this is the implementation. There's a few things I want to point out over here. Look at the schema that the schema enforces. So notice name over there. Name constraint is between 10 and 100. And also health constraint between 0 and 100. And also the attribute constraints between 0 and 100. And notice how it's appearing in the FastAPI documentation. Same with all of these different schemas. You'll see that same constraints appearing here. Okay, let's give it a test. So I'm going to try it out. Firstly, let's test one of those constraints. So I'm going to create Gandalf, and this is not going to work. The reason for that will be clear. String should have at least 10 characters. That's the first constraint I pointed out earlier. Okay, so Gandalf the White, this should work. There we go, Gandalf the White was created. Look at the ID over there. So the ID makes it clear that it did create and it returned. I'm going to just use that ID and select Gandalf, see? So that is coming from the JSON file back into our API here. API returns it. Let's do an update of the attributes. I'm firstly going to show you how we get a failure. So we'll update Gandalf, and I'm going to update presence to 120. This will give me an error. So we have here input should be less than or equal to 100. Next, I'm going to add an unexpected attribute here, test. Just put in any value, 100. There we go. So we have now 2 error messages here. The second one, extra inputs are not permitted. So now I'm going to update 3 attributes, send in a packet of data and update the attributes. Okay. Oh, this didn't work. Why not? Illegal trailing comma. So let's just fix that. All right, this should have worked. There we go. So Gandalf would update it 85, 99, 95 on might, agility, vitality. That's a great example of how this API is working. All of this comes from the OpenAPI spec. So this is the OpenAPI spec that's automatically written for us by FastAPI, and then Swagger user interface uses this to build that user interface we just used. All right, there's another document system that ships with FastAPI. It's Redoc. This is a great example of Redoc over here. Redoc doesn't allow you to test the API as nicely as you do with Swagger API, but it does give you in my opinion, sometimes a nicer navigation through the API. I'm just going to quickly touch on this, and then we'll move on from here. So what I'm going to do now is show you the command line interface. Before I do that, that's Gandalf the White, which we just created and updated, just so you see it's in the JSON file. So the first thing, in order to run the API, we'll use uvpip install -e dot, which installs our package as an editable in the local environment. It'll also give me the ability of just using character once I source into the virtual environment, like I'm doing here. And then I'll type character, and that shows you that the command line interface is working. So inside the README file, you'll see an example of the command line interface usage. I'm just copying that. So let me just go to the front of here and use character to initiate. Oh, that's it. That's all. Sauron the Black. Okay, that should work. There we go. Sauron was created. So notice there also an ID was generated. So it entered the JSON file. I'm going to do the same thing, just show you how the same constraints are coming into action here. So we're getting an error here that says input should be less than or equal to 100. Going into the API, this is the FastAPI doc. This is the application file, the CLI. Just showing you the different code files, and then we're going to step through them. DTO, repository. So we have here api.py, application.py, cli.py, domain.py, dto.py, and repository.py. So let's look at, I'm just going to activate, make sure we're in the right virtual environment over here. It doesn't seem to be the case. So we're going to step through domain models and annotated types. That's really what I want to focus on in this video. A lot of the other stuff will expand in future episodes. Data transfer objects, I'll touch on that. Repository, application use cases, API, CLI, command line interface. So let's look at the domain models over here. So this is two things that I want you to note. We're importing Pydantic and typing annotated. We're defining an annotated type. And if this doesn't make a lot of sense, look at mastering Python type hints, where I go into great detail on how to use annotated types. Notice there the pattern that's defined. That's a regular expression that Pydantic will enforce. So Pydantic absorbs and examines the annotated type and then builds the constraint. The same thing here with the next one, character name. We have the min length and max length over there. That's why Gandalf failed originally. And over here we have the health as well as the different attributes, 0 to 100 constraint. That's our two classes. These are the domain classes. Notice how simple they are. They are built using the annotated types. And now in future, we're going to add some more invariants into these classes. But for now, we're just keeping them super simple like this. Data transfer objects, we're importing the same annotated types. Line 4 over there. From domain import, we're importing all of the annotated types. And then we're building the DTO. The first DTO here is a class, which we are doing just so that we don't have to redefine model config. We're defining that once, and we're inheriting from this class so that that's everywhere. We're defining here character attributes, DTO, which we'll reuse. So then we have character base, which that's where we're using character attributes, DTO, as well as name and health. So that gives us a base for our character. And we're defining create character request DTO. This is the request that will attach now to FastAPI. And we're just using character-based DTO for that. We're also defining our response. And the only thing that the response has in addition to the request is the ID. We have update character attributes, request DTO. So this would be for the update. Notice the none equals none over there. It indicates that these are all optional fields. So that's why we were able to only update 3 of them. And then update character response DTO. That's where we are returning the create character response DTO. All right, repository is in a clean architecture. The repository is where you're dealing with the data. So over here we have a JSON repository, and I'm not going to go into great detail here. So that's we have your character repository JSON file. So typically, this would be what a repository looks like. You could do it as functions. In this case, we implemented a class, and we have things like list all, get by ID, add, update. And then we have some helper classes down here: read raw, read validated, write raw. Application use cases. So the application use cases interact with the domain. They also receive the DTOs. So DTO objects come in. The delivery layer transfers them into the application layer, and the application layer unpacks them and then establishes or instantiates the objects and works with the repository or other infrastructure as required. I'll give you an example of that. So we have here create character. You'll see that it receives create character request DTO and it returns create character response DTO. What it does there on line 39 is notice the request.attributes.model dump. What it does over there, it unpacks the DTO, gets all the data of the DTO, and it then it creates a character attributes model. So that's the first thing we're doing, creating the character attributes over there. And that also forms part of the creation of the character model, line 35. So character equals character. We're putting an ID, which is new ID, which is a function which is generating a new ID for us. Name and health, and then also the attributes. And that's creating the character. And then we're sending that to the repository. You always want to send, and we'll look into detail on this, but you want to send the actual objects to the repository, not the DTO objects. Okay, update character attributes. This is the update function. And then get character API. So notice how simple the API is. It's really, we don't have any logic in here. And this is the command line interface as well. What I want you to notice here is the command line. Let's go to, for example, here, create. What it does exactly the same thing as the API. And this is why I wanted to have I wanted to have the API as well as the command line interface. So you can notice the pattern. All we're doing is we're packing it in the data transfer object and sending it to the application layer. From that point onwards, everything stays the same. We don't have anything in the application layer that knows about FastAPI or command line interface. All we know is there's a data transfer object coming in, and we're unpacking that and we're doing a create. Whether that comes in, for example, imagine that you have some gRPC or you have some other type of call, or maybe you have command line, FastAPI. Maybe you want to add a different type of API, or an event. It's a good example, an event that gets absorbed and you want to create a character. You'll do exactly the same thing. Pack it into a DTO object, send it off to the application layer, create character in the application layer, and that's it. You don't worry about that. And that way you are creating a loose coupled system which makes it easy to change. The moment you have a tightly coupled system, if anything changes, then you need to try and figure out where are all the dependencies and what needs to change. And that was a quick walkthrough for the implementation of episode 2. I will see you in the next version, in the next episode. So I hope this was helpful. If there's anything that you want me to zoom in on, let me know. If there's any of this that you want me to expand on, I'm going to make these walkthroughs quicker, so it takes a little bit less time, but there is obviously the chance that you might want me to expand on anything here. Just let me know, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the instructions for episode 3. Thank you.